Hi folks, Matt here from the Ask the Arb podcast, and today we've got 10 questions in from our customers. So let's dig right in. So I'm recording this at the end of June, just before I sneak off on holiday for a week actually, and as you'll probably imagine, very hectic time here at the moment with the guys out doing surveys all across the UK to help people get their planning back on track. And we get, I guess, probably somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 questions through all our social media channels, and sometimes directly from customers in the course of a month. And I thought what would be fantastic would be to take a bit of time just to go through some of these questions, because I know that quite often they are common questions that everybody has. At the end of this podcast, I'll pop up, I'll probably put it in the show notes, there'll be a couple of links. We've got a couple of online scorecards, one for Ecology and one for tree surveys. You can always go and stick your project details through there, and it will basically spit you out a score at the end of it and tell you whether your project is on track or not. And then depending on the outcome of that, there's a couple of ways that we can help you here at Rover. You can either go on Amazon and get one of our many books on trees and ecology and biodiversity, net gain, all that kind of good stuff, and that ranges from free right up to the cost of a survey. So there's lots of different ways that we can help you, from free to commissioning us to help you with surveys. So let's jump right into these questions. So first off, we've got a question in from Arwen. I'm assuming Arwen is based in Wales. That's quite an unusual name, isn't it? How can I determine if there are any protected trees on my property that might affect my extension plans? Arwen, that's a fairly simple one, to be honest. So there are two ways trees are protected, and one is through a tree preservation order, and one is through the tree being located in a conservation area. If the tree has got a tree protection order on it, then the local planning authority will have details of that. So what you need to do is go onto Google, basically search your local planning authority. So let's say Guildford Borough Council, stick that into Google. That will return their website. When you get on their website, you then need to go into the search functionality of the website, which is often up in the top right, and you can basically search for tree preservation orders. And often that will bring up, some local authorities have really useful online mapping. We do this as part of our reporting desktop studies. And some local authorities will have really good online mapping where you can search for your property and see the details of those trees. Other local authorities aren't so good, and some don't even publish them online. There was a move, I guess, probably in the 90s and early 2000s, that when tree preservation orders started to get published online, it was enabling people to potentially do nefarious things like fell trees ahead of planning applications. So a lot of local authorities didn't put their details online, but most of them have now got them digitised, and they're available online. Through the same system, it'll also tell you whether your tree is located within a conservation area or not. If it's located in a conservation area, it's a lower level of protection, but if you wanted to do any work on that tree, you would still have to inform the local planning authority of your intentions. Whereas if the tree is protected by either an individual tree protection order or an area tree preservation order, then essentially what needs to happen then is you would need permission to work on that tree. It's also worth pointing out that regardless of whether trees are protected by tree preservation orders or not, they're still given the same sort of level of protection through the planning process. So the same kind of survey data needs to be provided. So even if your tree isn't protected, you still need to give the LPA that information. Conversely, if your development is permitted development, so let's say you're putting a garden building in or something like that, and you don't need planning permission, but you've got a protected tree, you still need to demonstrate to the local planning authority through the planning portal by having a BS 5837 report done on that tree. So if you need any more than that, Arwen, just reach out and get in contact. Fiona here, what are the potential impacts of a wraparound extension on the root systems of nearby trees, and how can these be mitigated? Great question, Fiona. The only way really to work that out is to get a surveyor out to site to take various measurements off the trees. So BS 5837, which is the standard all tree surveys for planning, are carried out to is fairly subjective. Reason being that there obviously had to be a benchmark system developed for assessing where the roots of trees might be, and what sort of size protection area might be required, and that's a function of stem diameter of the tree. So we use a special calibrated tape measure to get the stem diameter of the tree, and that allows us to draw on a plan a circle around that tree, which is the area that tree requires at that particular point in time, to be respected, in order that the tree doesn't have any negative effects to it. However, like I say, it is very subjective, so there are lots of things, level changes, walls, the original construction of the house. There's lots of things that will influence where the tree roots go. Tree roots are advantageous and they seek out the best growing conditions, so you really need an arboriculturalist to make a decision on that, because you may find that just drawing a circle on a plan gives you an area that potentially there isn't any tree roots in, and could be exploited, or it might be that the tree roots are offset closer to your property because there's a root barrier on the other side of the tree. So really the only way around that, Fiona, is to have a survey done. Flora. How close can I build to mature trees without causing damage to their root systems or compromising the stability of the extension? There's a lot to unpick there. That's a fairly complicated one. So there's two things going on here. So first, we want to make sure that trees are retained through development, which means that their root protection areas are respected. Tree roots are responsible for gaseous exchange, so both water and nutrients and oxygen out of the soil. Now, what you don't want to do is compromise that, because that will now have a negative effect on the tree moving forwards. You also need to make sure that the foundations of your extension are constructed in such a way that, and I think this is what you're getting at, that they're not compromised in terms of subsidence. Now, trees act like giant pumps. They suck water out of the soil in the active growing months through the spring, summer, autumn, and through mid to late autumn and into the winter. They're not taking so much water out of the soil. So what tends to happen is, if you have a certain type of soil, clay in particular, which has a high, what they call plasticity index, it basically means that the soil can move. So if your extension, if the footings on your extension aren't deep enough, then you could potentially end up with movement and cracking. So really, we're straying into the realms of structural engineering. So you would have a tree survey carried out, which would tell you soil types and the water requirements of the tree and the root protection area and all that kind of good stuff. And then what would need to happen is you'd need to work with a structural engineer. We've had projects where there's been detached houses that have been built on piles because of they're on clay soil and there's big trees nearby, which has meant that the extensions have also had to be built on piles as well, with all sorts of clever expansion joints and stuff. So it is possible, but you need the right advice. Who else have we got here? Gail. Are there specific tree species that are more sensitive to construction work, and how should I plan around them? Yes, anecdotally, and this is just based on sort of 25-30 years experience, some trees definitely don't respond well to any sort of disturbance within their root protection area, and that could be as much as just you having a lawn that's regularly mown. And the type of trees I'm talking about there are particularly sycamores and ash trees. They really do not like construction work anywhere near them. However, I would sort of disregard that comment, and I would suggest that what you need is a tree survey that shows you the root protection areas of the trees, and then you would have a tree protection plan which would show you where you would put tree protection fencing for the construction phase, and that would keep all construction activity away from the trees and ensure that they're protected. Helen, right, so let me just making sure I've got these names written down right. What are the best practices for protecting trees during the construction of a 2-story rear extension? That's very specific. So essentially, you're unlikely to get through planning without a tree survey. So if there are trees within 15 metres of your proposed development, then you would need a tree survey carried out on those. That would assess the impacts on those trees through something called an arboricultural impact assessment. And what you would need is, if you were getting close to the root protection areas of those trees, or even just outside, it's likely the planning application would need to be supported by something called an arboricultural method statement and a tree protection plan. And that basically just sets out to the developers, to the builders, exactly what needs to happen to protect those trees during the construction phase. And that can be a number of things. So if the tree is a reasonable distance away, it could be as simple as some herass, the metal fence panels that you see on development sites. They would be erected around the root protection area of the tree, on the edge of the root protection area of the trees. That would be braced so that it couldn't be moved through the construction phase, and that would adequately protect that tree. There are other things that need to be considered. So let's say you need to access through a root protection area to get to the rear garden to do the extension. Then we would look at putting ground protection boarding down and maybe a box around the stem of the tree to protect that from mechanical damage. So that boarding would be put down on a compressible layer of wood chip or something like that, just to stop compaction and erosion in the root protection. So there's lots of things that can be done there. How are we doing for time? 11 minutes. Okay, so we've got 5 questions here on the ecology side of things. So we've got Laura here. That's Laura. How can I identify if there are any protected species such as bats or birds that might be affected by my building plans? So I'm guessing by that question, Laura, you've probably been pushed back at planning. So local planning authorities have a duty to ensure that protected species are not affected by development activities, and they're not allowed to determine a planning application until they're satisfied that is the case. So the way that you can do it as a homeowner or architect is you would approach an ecology firm and you would commission what's known as a preliminary ecological assessment. And that preliminary ecological assessment is proportionate to the risk to the site. So if it's a very small residential project, it could be as simple as a desktop study and either a very quick walkover or maybe even some photos from the homeowner themselves. If it's a larger site, multiple units, river nearby, woodland, something like that, it gets a bit more complicated and there's more work involved. But the very first bit of that is to commission a preliminary ecological assessment. Then what would happen is the ecologist would do a desktop study to see what, if any, protected species are in the local area. And once they've got that information, they would come to site and they would look for evidence of those protected species and also evidence of other protected species as well, because records aren't always up to date. And once they've got that information, they would then produce a report which would tell you what, if any, further surveys would need to be carried out. You mentioned bats and birds. Bats are obviously much more complicated to deal with than birds, and as part of the preliminary ecological assessment, a preliminary bat roost assessment would be carried out. So the ecologist coming to site would probably want to look in the loft void. They'd be looking for evidence of bats. And if they find any evidence of bats or lots of potential bat roosting features on your property, you would need further activity surveys, but we're straying into a different area there. I would suggest if you're having a single story extension, it's probably unlikely that bats would be something that would have to be dealt with. If you're having a 2-story extension, which is tying into existing roof line, then that becomes more of a thing. David. So David says, what steps should I take to ensure my extension project complies with wildlife protection laws and regulations? It's the same as Laura really, David. You need a preliminary ecological assessment. So you need to demonstrate to the local planning authority that you have considered all of this before you go ahead. It's all very similar questions on the ecology side of things. Mary, what kind of ecological surveys might be required before I can get planning permission for my extension? So as a householder application, you're not going to get into the realms of biodiversity net gain, so we won't talk about that. We've talked about that before on the show. Almost certainly it's going to depend, Mary, on whether it's a single story or a 2-story extension. If it's a 2-story extension, the big one really is going to be bats. That's going to be the one the local planning authority will be concerned about there, and possibly nesting birds. But a lot of this will depend on the age and the type of the property as well. Nara, how can I incorporate features into my extension that benefit local wildlife like bat boxes or bird nesting sites? So that would be highlighted within your preliminary ecological assessment. There's normally a section within the report that will tell you pretty much down to the exact type. So the ecologist will consider what is in the local area and what is most appropriate. It's no good putting up bat boxes for void dwelling bats, for instance, if there aren't any in the local area or the site isn't suitable. So it depends, excuse me, it depends entirely on your site, Nara. Orin, what are the potential impacts of building an extension on local biodiversity and how can I mitigate these impacts? That's a strange one. I wonder what you've been asked for there. Orin, it entirely depends on the site, really. Ecology is very bespoke, very local level. So, I mean, it's really unhelpful, I get that, but it really just depends. You could have a river at the end of your garden, you could have a pond, you might have to consider great crested newts, it might be a very old building that you might have to consider barn owls. How long's a piece of string? So let's have a look. So that's 10 and that's 16 minutes, so that's not bad at all. So what I would say to any of the listeners, if you would like to ask us a question, just pop a question in the comments below and we'll pick those up on another episode. And if you'd like to see whereabouts your planning application is at the moment in terms of viability, then click one of the links below. We've got one for ecology, one for arboriculture, and that would help you out. So we'll see you on the next one.